You and me both. Yeah, I don't just wear glasses. I have to carry about 3 pairs around now. I've got my reading glasses, I've got my regular glasses, I've got my office glasses, which I'm wearing now. And yeah, in any event, tiny text on the screen. This laptop I'm using right now has a resolution of, yeah, I think it's 2560 by 1600 or something. Yeah, and it's a 16-inch screen, so you can imagine how small it makes things. 2560 by 1600, yeah. So, the last couple of Warpstocks, I've given some presentations on the general feature of large fonts and icons in ArcOS and in OS2 more generally. The last presentation I did last year, Warpstock US, was kind of devoted to how it works on a system level, how to get your desktop text and icons and all of that up to what for me would be a readable size on the screen. But questions that I've had about applications, individual applications, as Roderick said, they don't always necessarily follow along exactly. So rewinding a bit, as has just been said, as I just illustrated with this computer, these days a lot of computer screens, and even on laptops, they do come with very high resolutions. And I want to kind of stress that when it comes to high resolutions, the issue isn't so much the number of pixels, 2560 by 1600 in this case, for example. It's really the pixel density that's the problem. So the number of pixels relative to the physical size of the screen. So in display terminology, this is usually measured in dots per inch or pixels per inch. And yeah, the term had its origins in printing press typesetting, or certainly in photo typesetting. So it predates the widespread adoption of metric. Hence, it's still used as the dots per inch or pixels per inch measurement. But to illustrate that, what I mean by that, so take a standard full HD resolution, which is 1920 by 1920 by 1080 pixels. On a screen which is 22 centimeters high, or 8.7 inches, your typical like T43 screen, size screen, or this one I think is slightly more than that. So 22 centimeters high is 8.7 inches. That is on the high end for laptops in terms of screen height. With 1920 by 1080, that results in a density of 124 pixels per inch. So that's very close to the 120 dpi, which is what OS2 is kind of designed for implicitly. However, if you shrink the screen down just a little to maybe a less high-end ThinkPad or a less high-end business notebook or something else, let's say 18 centimeters high. That's fairly typical for sort of smaller laptops. A full HD screen, 18 centimeters is 7 inches high, so your pixel density is then just over 150 pixels per inch. And everything is going to appear smaller because it's more condensed. As I just said, OS2 Presentation Manager was designed for a pixel density of either 96 or 120 ppi. So with modern computer screens coming along with higher and higher pixel density, all of our icons, text, UI elements, they get smaller and smaller on the screen. And for those of us with less than perfect eyesight, this presents a bit of a problem. Now, of course, you could try just setting a lower resolution on your screen. The problem is, or one of the problems with that is, most monitors have a native resolution nowadays. And if you use a different one, you generally get a kind of fuzzier looking image. Modern monitors aren't as bad in this respect as older ones, but it's still, you're not going to look as good, you're not going to look as crisp if you're not running the native resolution. And you're also kind of wasting the capabilities of your screen that way.
The screen is not correct?
No, this is the screen I'm on. In fact, I'm just about to go to the next one. Okay, so how do you solve this? The obvious answer is to increase the size of the elements on screen. So increase your text size, increase your icon size, increase the size of your widgets, your UI elements if you can. So as I have discussed in my past presentations on this topic, there are some solutions available now for Presentation Manager as a whole, the OS2 desktop. So for example, dynamic icons can give you large, high-quality desktop icons. And the latest versions of X Workplace have a feature, as Roger pointed out, where you can set the font size throughout the desktop, more or less. As we say, it's not perfect, but it's pretty good, and it's getting better, I would say. However, these don't really address individual applications. So these basically have to be updated by the developer. When I've talked about this in the past, this question has come up several times. So what should developers do to update their software? So the basic idea is pretty simple. Don't hard code a window font into your application. Either use the system setting or allow the user to select a font. And if you're familiar with dialog resource syntax, you know what that is. This is an example of a dialog where the dialog has a font presentation parameter set. In this case, it's 9-point warp sans, and that is actually what developers have been kind of implicitly encouraged to do for the last many years, and in fact, it is exactly the wrong thing to do. So obviously that raises the question, what do you do instead? So the simplest case, and when I say case, it is a case-by-case thing. There are different contexts and different ways in which you use fonts in any application. It varies a bit between types of program as well. But let's take the simplest case, which is presentation managed dialogues. For PM dialogues, you can usually just not set a font presentation parameter. That's the simplest solution. The beauty of doing this is that as long as the dialogues are designed in a certain way, the system will automatically rescale them for you, depending on what the system font setting is. So basically, the dialog needs to be laid out so that everything works when no font presentation parameter is set. In other words, you design the dialog with the default system font, which, if nothing is explicitly set, generally defaults to system proportional, 10 or 12 point, depending on the screen resolution. Unfortunately, a lot of software, as I say, isn't designed this way because it wasn't really encouraged in the past by various developer resources. So for existing programs, you might have to do some work to relay out the dialogues. I've had to do this with a lot of my programs, for example. And also, this advice doesn't entirely help if you need to have particular fonts or variations of fonts on your dialog. For example, you want bold text for something, or you want to have an enlarged heading for something. So what do you do if your use case is a bit more complicated? Well, in those cases, or for non-dialog windows, or when you want a user customizable font, you're going to need to use more dynamic logic. So I have evolved a few approaches, depending on the type of application. I don't claim that any of them is foolproof, but kind of edge cases often have to be dealt with specifically anyway. So these seem to work reasonably well for the types of programs that I've applied them to. And I've given the sample programs to a couple of you already, I believe. But what we really need to try and do here is intelligently resize the dialog and all of its controls whenever the font is set or changed. So here's your two main objectives. First of all, when you start up your interface, when you load the window or the dialog or whatever, you set a suitable font at runtime. I want to emphasize that, at runtime, not at design time. So the font is not set until your program actually runs. And then you dynamically resize the window contents as needed, either on startup if it's never going to be changed after then. But if you have a program where the user can change the font at some later point, you also need to be able to resize the dialog when the font is changed. So these are the two basic objectives. So let's look at the first one, which is selecting a suitable font at runtime. The simplest approach, and one which is good for general cases, I would say, is to just use the presentation manager default window text font. It's defined in os2.ini. The exact path to the setting is there. So user profile, that's os2.ini. Then the PM_system fonts group, and the window text setting. So this is a good font to use for normal window text. For headers or emphasized text, there's a couple things you can do. You could try to take the window text font and then just look for a font with the same metrics and the same name, but with bold as an attribute. And if you're using a bitmap font, by the way, you can literally just append like bold to the end of the name, generally speaking, and search for that, or dot bold, possibly. Depends on whether it's a native name or a simulated name, but that's kind of getting into the weeds a bit. Or there's a way to cheat slightly, which is what I said here. If you need a bold font, often you can just use the default title bar font because it's usually bold. Now that isn't always the case. Some people might configure their systems to use something else, but I mean, generally speaking, the title bar font is a font that will stand out a bit, whatever it is, hopefully. So yeah, you can get the window title bar font by also getting it from os2.ini, and it's called window titles. Or you could use the menu font, for example, as nothing. So this is sort of a convenient shortcut, which works pretty well in most cases. As I say, the sort of proper way to do it is use like WinQuery fonts and try to find a bold version of the font you're using, but that's quite a bit more logic. And if anybody here has ever used WinQuery fonts to select the font, it generally involves quite a lot of code. I think I think it was Ulrich Müller who described it as an 11-step process. All right, so give me 1 second here. Any questions about the font selection logic, by the way? You can, of course, allow the user to select the font. More sophisticated applications will probably take that approach. Have an option where the user can, select a font either from a palette of choices or from like any installed font that they want. In which case, I mean, that's easy because you just read the font that they've chosen. What do you do for a default? Well, before the user's chosen their own font, you want a default font again. It's probably not a bad idea to go back to window text just for your initial default. So the same sort of advice applies. But in either case, you're going to want to be able to resize your controls dynamically. And that's where things get a little bit tricky. So there's kind of a few ways that you can do this. Basic concept here, and this is a basic concept. There are a number of ways that the logic could be refined. When the window is first drawn, or when the window is first drawn, you make a note of what the current font size is. Say it's 10 point. All right. So then whenever the font changes, you need to get the point size of the new font and then calculate a scaling factor to convert between the old font size and the new font size. So let's say my default font is 10.Helvetica, and the user decides to configure a different font, like, I don't know, 12-point system proportional. The nice thing about point sizes is that they are kind of universal in terms of physical bounding box of the height. So 12-point in any font is going to have the same bounding box height as 12-point in any other font. The M height, it's called. So you really only need to look at the point size when you're doing this calculation. So in my example here, the original size was 10 point, and that's how the dialog is currently laid out, assuming 10-point size. So the user has said, I want a 12-point font. What do? Well, you calculate a scaling factor by dividing the new size by the previous size. So 12 divided by 10. That's your factor. And then you want to multiply all of your widget positions and dimensions by the new factor. And by the way, if I get any of the math wrong or backwards, please excuse me, because math has never really been my strongest subject. But this is your basic logic. Once you've got the factor, you then go through all of the controls on your dialog. You multiply their width and height by the scaling factor, and optionally their x and y position coordinates. Now, some special consideration is required for this, because there are going to be certain controls that you don't want to move. Anything that's going to be in the origin point of the window, you don't want to move. Same with the window itself. Everything else, you're going to want to shift as things are sized. So what I'll generally do is I'll write a function called something like rescale control, and I'll give it parameters like the ID of the control, the scaling factor, and a Boolean which says resize only or resize envy position. And then for the window itself, I'll set that Boolean to false. If I have something like an icon that I want in a fixed position, like right on the left edge of the dialog, I'll also generally set that to false. And then everything else, I'll set it to true. So it'll resize everything, and anything that I don't want moved will stay where it is. Anything that I do want moved, which is basically anything that's not fixed to the origin of the window, the origin coordinates, that will get shifted over. So as I say, this isn't a foolproof method, but in my experience, it works pretty well. I'll have some demonstrations of how I've done this in a few different languages in a little bit later.
Do you have a DLL for this?
No, it kind of has to be done. Well,
because that was what I was thinking about.
You'd have to do it probably for each language, or at least for each environment, because I mean, a DLL that works with direct presentation manager dialogues isn't going to work that well for VxRex applications, because those aren't really. I generally just have snippets of code that I copy and paste, because honestly, the code is not big. It's really just a few lines. And a lot of the nuisancey part is actually just calling the function for each of your controls, and that you kind of have to do per application anyway. I mean, I can imagine a few ways that you could kind of genericize it a little, but you'd have to enforce certain strict restrictions on the way it's programmed in the first place. I don't necessarily know if it's worth going down that road. Anyway, so now that's a very high level overview of the theory. So why don't we look at some real examples? And I've got some sample programs that illustrate this logic. So for standard C presentation manager stuff, you can't maybe make it out too well on the screen here, but it is in the slides. These are basically links off my website. Zip files, which include source code, and some comments and documentation, fairly terse probably. So I've got one for presentation manager and C, easily adaptable to like C++ or whatever, or various other languages probably. I've got one example for VxRex. That could probably be adapted easily enough for any other Rex-based graphical environment. I've also done it for Sybil applications in a couple of cases. I haven't put together a sample program for this. If anybody actually uses Sybil and wants to look at an example, they can look at the New View or AE editor. It's probably a bit simpler. Source code. The techniques are in there. It does actually make use of some of Aaron Lawrence's custom functions. So you'd probably have to put those from the New View and AE sources. I'll take a quick look at that if you're interested. But Qt applications, generally you don't need to do anything really, because Qt normally uses the system font size by default anyway. So if you're not setting custom fonts there, you don't really have to worry, because it handles the dynamic adjustment for you automatically, which I was very happy to discover when I was thinking, do I have to update my Qt applications? Oh no, wait, they already work. How nice. So I will now open up my VM here. I think I'm probably going to have to switch to mirrored display. Yeah. Huh? Oh, right, I didn't apply. Yes, thank you. Oh, I have that. Duplicate these displays. Keep changes. Okay. There we go. All right, so so let's take a look at the C sample code first. This is a simple program. I call it DYN font. And I'll just kind of quickly go through some of the stuff here. Let me give you a better font here.
This is to protect your code, Alex. The lights came on.
Oh, yeah.
It's a DMC protection.
How legible is that? Still not very, is it?
Almost.
All right, let me try something a bit bigger. How's that?
Yeah, I can read it.
Okay. So, sorry, those of you who aren't particularly conversant in code, this is probably the boring part, but it's my main program. I start up. First thing I do is say, okay, tell me what the window text font is, sudo-ini. This is the thing that I pointed at before. So if you're not familiar with the API here, it's asking for the ini setting. This is a fallback if there's an error reading it. It just saves that in the variable g_ach text font. I've got just a wrapper function that says font exists. If it doesn't exist, fall back again. If it does exist, here what I do is I look for a bold variant of the font. And literally what I just do, rather than doing a win query fonts to look for, is there a bold variation of this font? Almost every bold font is just the name of the font with bold at the end. So it's usually sufficient to just search for another font with bold at the end. So that's what I do here. And then I just call my font exists function, which, if you're curious, is it's just calling GPI query fonts and then looking to see if it has, if it can find the name. And yeah, that's pretty much it. The name and the size, I should say. Because when you're dealing with bitmap fonts, you have to search for the specific size as well as the name. If it's a true type or type 1 font, then it's just the name. But anybody who deals with fonts in their application probably knows this already. So I won't dwell too much on that. So now that I have the font, it's just some debugging text there to show some stuff. So then I load my dialog. My main window is a dialog for a simple program. It's usually not a bad idea to just create a dialog template for your main window unless you want to do something super fancy with it. I'll show you the dialog code. It's very simple. It's going to be small again, isn't it? Yeah. Well, yeah, it doesn't matter. It's basically your standard dialog. The only thing that's important to note about it is that it does not have a font presentation manager, presentation parameter defined. So what do I do when I open the dialog? The wm-init dialog message. For those who aren't aware, this gets called whenever you create a dialog or initialize it specifically. So when this happens, I call my update fonts function. And this is the function that is going to handle all of the font setting and resizing logic. So I call that before I do win-show window, just so that it doesn't like... Yeah. So my update fonts function here is fairly simple. Here I've just created a static array with all of the IDs of the font, all of the dialog IDs of the controls that I want to update. I basically just, call winsetPresParam on all of these controls. I have one control which I want in a bold font. This is the IDV_font control, and I'll show you what that is when I actually run this program. So this one I set to the G_bold font. These are, I mean, it's kind of sloppy programming, but for a simple program like this, I don't think it's a big deal. It's to just use global variables for some of these. In a more sophisticated program, you'd probably put this in your global structure and pass it around in the window words or something. But yeah. So these are my two font globals, the standard text font and the bold text font. And I have another one, which is the previous font size. So I need to remember what the last font size I set was. Yeah. So whenever I update the fonts, first thing I do is I set the fonts, and then I have, it scans the point size here. Very simple logic, but I just scan the string with the font name and parse the font size out of it. Again, I mostly use bitmap fonts for this stuff, so it's pretty simple. You might want to be a little more sophisticated if you're allowing like true type fonts and so on. The basic logic isn't different. It's just the housekeeping might be a little more convoluted. If you're using true type fonts, I assume you know how to handle like font metrics and stuff anyway. So yeah, I've set the font here. And I've parsed the font size here. If the new font size is not any different from the old font size, then I don't have to do anything else. I just return. But if they're different, then I calculate a factor by dividing the new font size, convert it into a floating point value. I divide it by the old font size, and then I call my scale controls function. So this is just a convenience wrapper that I wrote that handles the rescaling. It just takes the array of controls that I want to resize, and the size of the array, and the scaling factor, and scale controls. So first thing I do is I resize. So this is just in itself a wrapper to my resize control function, which resizes a single control. So resize control takes these parameters, takes the handle of the window handle of the control, takes the factor by which to multiply the coordinates, and several booleans. Do I want to move the control as well as resize it? Yes or no. Do I want to resize the control horizontally? Yes or no. And do I want to resize the control vertically? Yes or no. And there are a couple of cases where you might want to resize something in one direction or not the other. I don't recall exactly why I found that necessary, but I did find it necessary. So if you find a case where something doesn't really like to be resized in one dimension or another, or it doesn't work for your layout, that's why this sort of thing is useful. And I see a question coming. Just give me 1 second. So going back to my scales control function, the first thing it does is it calls resize control on the whole dialog. So it passes in the hwind, which is the dialog itself, and the factor, and then it says false for the first boolean, which is the reposition. So it keeps the same position, but it sets the resize ones to true. So the window as a whole is not going to move, but it is going to be resized. Then for every other control in the array, I am going to call resize control, and this time it's going to reposition and resize. And question?
Do I have to press to?
No, I don't think so.
It's on. Okay. Do you make any differentiation in the type of control? So you look at what the control is, and do you look at the styles as well? Because some controls, they look completely changed. For example, a drop-down list or a pull-down list. Also, because I did some of what you were doing there, and I ran into several problems because, for example, if you have control with scroll bars, that is slightly different when you try to expand it. Because, for example, if you have something an inch wide and you say it now has to be 2 inches wide, the problem is the scroll bar is a fixed width. So by doubling it, you in fact have more work room for the text than you actually need.
You can set a scroll bar width, I believe.
Yeah, you can set it, but I mean, normally if you just double the size of a dialogue,
Yeah.
A simple dialogue with a vertical scroll bar,
Mm-hmm.
the actual work area is now more than double because the scroll bar does not multiply in size to the width of your dialogue, for example.
Yeah. So this is a very basic example. Now, the main thing that makes it simplistic is the way I've written the scale controls wrapper. For more fine-grained control, I would basically manipulate these options, and in some cases even the factor for different controls. And I might even set a different font for a specific control, for example. Same basic logic works, I think. For your case, it might be, you might need to get the handle of the scroll bar as well, and then call Resize Control on that. And you would probably want, I suspect you would want to set the reposition option to false for that one, because I think there, it depends on how the scroll bar is positioned. If you're handling the positioning of it on your own, then you'd probably want to, but if it's a built-in scroll bar, I don't think I've tried with that particular type of control.
There are standard scroll bar widths,
yeah.
Horizontal and vertical. I know you can reset them.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry. I know you can change the scale. Obviously, if you are starting at, for example, 1024 as a horizontal pixel, you get a scroll bar which is a certain width. If you go to a higher resolution, the scroll bar is a lot thinner.
Yeah.
So the question is, do you want to resize your scroll bars even if you're going to a higher resolution? Because otherwise, at a certain moment in time, you can't even see them.
Yeah. Yeah, I would be inclined to allow the resizing of scroll bars if you can. And there are certain bounds checks you can do, like maybe if the scaling factor is below a certain point, don't bother. And if it's above a certain point, then you might want to. So let me show you what the program actually does here. Select font function is the last main function, and this just pops up a font selection dialog so that the user can change the font. A couple of these macros are just sort of useful. Round to int is just a convenient shorthand there. And it rounds, it doesn't truncate, which is
useful.
Yes. So this is what the program looks like with the default fonts. It's basically just a couple of static text controls and 2 buttons, and of course the dialog itself. So you might not be able to see it clearly on the screen here. The font button has a bold font. Everything else is the default font. So let's say I want to change this. So the default here is 11 point warp sans. Let's say I want to change it to 18 point warp sans. And notice I've got a bold version of it too. And it was defaulting to 11 point warp sans because that is what my current system is set to, I believe, because it would have been reading it from the INI file. Where are you? There you are. Oh yeah, you're never going to read that. Give me 1 second. PM system fonts. Window text, yeah, 11.warp sans. Can't really see that on the screen probably, but that's what it is. Take my word for it. And the window title bar font is 10.warp sans bold. I'm actually not using that cheat in this sample program. I'm using a slightly more sophisticated cheat, which is to tack bold onto the end of the font name. So this works for various fonts. Let's change this to Helvetica, or Helv, as they call it, 14 point. Okay, shrunk a little, but still pretty good. Now, What happens if I set a true type font here? Let's try Tahoma 14 point. Yeah, works. But what if I choose a much different sized font? Ooh, that's a little off the screen, but it still works. So,
Alex,
yeah.
do you have any advice on the fonts that we should use? I mean, additionally to what is applied with OS2, because I run into problems where I want two different size fonts, and trying to get the one that fits, even without any dynamic resolution, often a problem. It doesn't seem like there is a large number of available font types, if you like.
Yeah. It's one reason leaving it up to the user is generally a good idea.
Yeah, but what I mean is if I have a font, I want some small text, and generally use like something like monospace, and you can change the font size, but then sometimes the width is changing, and sometimes it's the height, depending if you're going from the standard, standard IO font, and to get it to fit nicely and look nice. So are there additional fonts you would say we should add to the system, or you don't? You just use what's standard?
I generally try to use what's standard as a default. And for cases where you really need a specific type of font, like a small monospaced font, for example, I would make that configurable. Choose a default like SystemVIO. But yeah, SystemVIO is very strange because its point sizes don't obey any kind of system or pattern. I'm not sure there's an easy answer, at least that fits every case. It's one of those case-by-case things, I think.
I was just wondering if you had yourself use special fonts. That works nice if it's very small, sort of thing.
Yeah, not so much. I mean, I actually have put together several bitmap fonts of my own, some of which have found their way into ArcOS. Mainly my doing, because I've identified gaps or things that I want. For example, there's much larger sizes of warp signs now, smaller sizes as well, I think. But yeah, for system monospaced is probably more reliable in terms of scaling, but it's not a very attractive font, is it?
No. But you also have sometimes a problem that certain characters are not available in certain fonts.
Yeah.
I can't think of a particular example, but you write some text and it has not an exclamation mark, but a hash or something not unstrange, or a euro sign, for example, which is not available in all fonts.
It certainly should be available in all OS2 fonts at this point. It might not be available on every code page.
Well, I was using this example. There are things which you sometimes use, and all of a sudden you get the rectangle.
Yeah. Again, it's one reason why it's generally best to assume that you only have the system fonts available, because they should all work for the characters under the current code page. If you're dealing with Unicode, you're probably going to want to switch to one of the Unicode fonts that's included, and all bets are kind of off at that once you get much past that, unfortunately. Yeah, I mean, there's no easy answer that works for everything. I think this is a basic set of tools, right? It allows you to get a good start on it. It works pretty well for most cases. As I said before, edge cases, you're going to have to deal with them as they come, pretty much. Hopefully, you've got enough sort of tools available to deal with that. We can talk about some of the specific issues you may have a bit later, maybe afterwards. Yeah. For some slightly more sophisticated stuff, let me see.
You're also using drag and drop?
Oh.
Drag and drop in font?
You can.
No, I mean, you have taken care of that in your program.
I don't think this program does it because the program doesn't save the current font. Oh, you mean intercepting the drag and drop event, right? I don't believe I do because it's a very simple program, but like you can really like all I would need to do is hang on a second. Let me just double check. All I need to do is intercept the drag drop event and then call that update fonts function because that's one reason it's abstracted into its own function. Yeah, I don't intercept it here, but I mean, I'm sure it would be as simple as just intercepting that event. Yeah. So one other thing I should probably do is actually. Okay, so this is the dialog. Now, what a lot of people, what a lot of developers have done in the past, I have been guilty of this because they never taught us any better, would have been to actually like put the resource on the dialog. It's capital S, isn't it? I think. Yeah.
It's always different from what you talk about.
Yeah, but the problem is if you do this, then you're going to be tempted to like, oh, well, I got all this room here. I don't need all this extra space here. I don't need all this. But that's not going to work once you rely on the presentation manager rescaling because the dialog unit in presentation manager is based on the default system font. So it's going to rescale all dialogues when that's changed based on the assumption that all dialogues are scaled for that font. So if I design a dialog for Warpstock, for example, I'm going to design it, unless I'm very careful, I'm probably going to design it to be much more compact than one that's using system proportional. But if the dialog gets rescaled because I've changed my system font from system proportional to, say, Warp Sans, this dialog is going to shrink and your text is going to be chopped off. Because the dialog unit size is based on the system default font size, not the font size on the window. Which brings up another point that I didn't really mention. Most of my logic here is assuming that you're doing your calculations in dialog units and not window units. If you want to resize something that's defined in window units, I found the best approach is to simply do a conversion to dialog units and then do your manipulation and convert it back at the end.
Because
it's simpler. You know that you're working in increments of dialog units, and that way everything's going to scale properly. If you're dealing with window units, it's more fine-grained than dialog units. I don't recall if I ever figured out why, but until I did that, I got weird results, I think, with stuff that was scaled in, well, because dialog controls are themselves normally seen by the system in dialog units. So if you're trying to set measurements in window units, like setting the size of the dialog, I think you basically have to specify in dialog units anyway, don't you, if it's a dialog control? Or do you?
no, we'd say window,
Yeah, okay.
and then you're in window unit. So
Yeah, I guess
I
that's
was
true.
wondering, so I had problems doing something like you were doing,
Yeah.
and I was always using window units. Maybe a reason.
Yeah. I don't really recall the details. I just thought I'd mention that. I seem to recall having to just finding it easier to deal with and more reliable when I converted everything to dialog units before doing the stuff, and then back if necessary. Now a second, I want to see if I have something a little more.
Alex, I have a quick question
Yeah.
for you. With regard to scaling the dialogue sizes, how does this dovetail with NLVs and, for instance, switching from English to German, where we all of a sudden have dialogues that were never clipped before, and all of a sudden they only get half the word in?
What's along?
In what context is that?
Let's say you have an application where you can change the language of the application while the application's running.
Okay.
Okay, so you have a single binary for the application. You're going to change it from English to German.
Yeah.
Now it's going to set up all the dialogues sized for the font.
Yeah.
But the words are going to overrun the length of the dialogue. How do you factor in the change in the string length?
That's something you have to design in on separately. I mean, it makes no difference whether or not the font resizing logic is in place or not. The issue is exactly the same. You have to design, if you're going to have a dialogue with.
String length would be a problem whether
Yeah.
I'm at 10 system proportional or
Yeah.
I'm at
Yeah.
22 system proportional.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm still going to have a problem with the string overrunning dialogue.
Yes. You're going to have to choose how to set your controls, either size them specifically per language, which is what we generally do. We have the dialogue resources separate for each language. That's probably the best way to do it. If you're not dealing with dialogue resources and you want to try and resize something dynamically, that's when you have to go into the GPI functions and start actually measuring the text strings, which, I mean, I think that's what Petzold recommends you do. It's not something I'd suggest for the faint-hearted. Yeah.
Okay, fair enough.
Probably take a scrollable plane or where automatically the scroll bar appears if it is too small, and so the user is able to resize the dialogue. So if it's just an alert, it's not possible, but normal dialogues, if you make them resizable and make it so that
The resizes not
yes,
does the
yes,
rest as well.
that you not only have a very small scrollable area, but the scrollable area grows with the size of the window. This fixes most of the problem. Not all, but most of those problems could be fixed for normal configuration settings or.
For sure, yeah, and as I say, there's like a scroll bar is just a control. You can resize it using the same method. I don't see any barrier to doing so. So here's an example of a dialogue which uses a bold font as well. So there's a bunch of sort of fluff logic in here that you don't need to worry about. But basically, I'm defining, as well as my standard dialogue font, I've also got a header font defined. And so in this case, I don't have a separate rescale controls function because I have to kind of handle them separately. So what I'm doing here is, actually, no, I do. Sorry. I'm setting the presentation parameters, and then I am, de-inflate is basically my factor. So I then call this enlarge controls. This is resize control on the window, and then enlarge controls, that's basically a slightly renamed version of my scale controls, which I did separately. But in this case, I think it's not, I don't have to resize the header separately because it's the same size, it's just bold. But, or at least it's the same relative size. Because if I define my header font as, you know, one size larger, or maybe 1.2 times the size of the standard font, the scaling factor should be the same, whether or not the font size is. And how am I defining the header font in this? Sorry. 1 second, Doug. Font UECS header small. Sectional header, okay. Let's see. I don't know. I'm looking it up somehow, but I'm not going to dig through the whole code. Sorry, Doug, what was that?
This is actually for Lewis, and probably all you multilingual guys. Is it fair to say that? Is it fair to say that the English version of almost every word is shorter than it is in just about every other language?
Not necessarily.
There are always exceptions.
Yes.
Yeah, there are exceptions.
But when you look at the scale, dialogue box.
In general, German is the worst.
No, Japanese is the worst.
Well, Japanese.
Oh, we can't read that anyway.
Exactly, we can't read that anyway. Yeah, in German, in general, German is the worst. I guess Dutch is probably next to that. Although we had some fun with Italian.
Italian's actually not that far off from English.
No, the issues that we had with Italian were more apostrophes and strings that we
Yeah,
weren't expecting.
yeah.
So you think every language has interesting. In terms of clip text and dialogues, German has been the toughest one for us, I think.
You know, an alternative to this is just sizing dialog boxes and windows is actually really complex. And you switch fonts and you switch languages, but the IBM Open Class Library has some facilities that simplify that quite a bit. So if you program for that, then rather than directly to PM, that can help mitigate some of those issues.
True. Although you're kind of limited to C and C++ in that case. I think.
You are.
So, speaking of that, I have another example. This one for VxRex applications. So here's I've also called it Dyn size. So this is a VxRex application. I've just got a debug console here, just to kind of show what you're doing here. So that's not really visible, so I will change the font to something bigger. I'll change it to like 18 again. Okay. Sorry for the slightly sexist example text there. I think I got this out of an old programming example. So, I mean the sample string. So this is basically the same idea, except when I show you the code, you'll see it's in Rex and not in C. But you can, if you can read this, which you probably can't, it tells you how and when it's changing the font size. So here it's changing the font size from 10 to 11. So that's a scaling factor of 1.1. Here it changes the font size from 11 to 18 with a scaling factor of 1.636, etc. And why is it changing from 10 to 11 at the start? Well, because in my Rex application, I also have the concept, and this can arguably apply in C as well, but VxRex does not use standard dialogues resources. It kind of uses its own sort of rendering. So you have to sort of choose what font you're designing at the start. So I designated a so-called design font size, which is the font that I designed the windows in, which was 10-point warp sans. But when I run the program, I immediately go to the system and say, what is the window text fonts? It's 11-point warp sans. Okay, so the first thing I do is I do the conversion from 10-point to 11-point. And I believe at one point I tried to implement the conversion logic by, instead of having previous font size, new font size, I think I had design font size, new font size, and then I'll always be starting from the same place. But that kind of got a little tricky to manage because I also had to keep track of the previous font size for some things, as I recall, and I didn't want to be keeping track of too many things at once. So I basically said, okay, I'll just scale relative to what the last font size was and hope that if I'm starting at 10, going to 12, going to 18, going to 12, going back to 10, hopefully there isn't some kind of rounding error that's going to make it look a little different. But honestly, is that likely to be a problem for most people? I doubt it. And of course, having said that, where's some wood for me to knock on? I don't know. But yeah. Anyway, I'll show you the code quickly. Oh, and this one actually has a text file, which kind of describes what you want to do. Oh, I shouldn't have used E, should I? Because I have no internet connection. And for some reason, the Qt text control always needs internet access if it's not going to spend 30 seconds trying to start up. I don't know why. It doesn't always do that. It doesn't do that in a sample program. It does do it in my QE editor. So obviously I've done something wrong, but I'm paying for it now. So.
Only during demonstration.
Oh no, it does it all the time. Whenever I'm not plugged into the internet. So. Actually, I should have internet. Oh, it's because I was on my hotel Wi-Fi when I started up this VM. That's why it hasn't caught up with the plot probably. All right, just use this one. Just use AE, which is good old editor, which I will actually be showing you the source of in a bit. Anyway, can you read that? Not very well. Let's make it a bit bigger. System VIO 18. Oops, and I hit cancel by mistake, didn't I? Motor control, it's an advanced skill. Okay, so here we kind of outline the basic concept. So here, again, we talk about what that design font is. So it's assumed that it's been designed with a single font size and face in mind, which I refer to as the design font. And then I kind of give some of the context, which I've talked about here. Talks about how to use the logic in this program. So I have a global constant called default size. And then every time a window is opened, figure out what font it's supposed to be using and set it on the window as it's initialized, and then do the same thing if the window font is changed. Then I want to get the scaling factor, where I am, again, using the exact same logic I showed you before, which is divide the new font size by the previous font size, and then it just kind of tells you how to call the functions. I don't imagine a lot of you are VxRex programmers, but I will show you. Okay, finally, the other one opens. All right, so the init function is, okay, here we are. So this is the initialization routine. It sets the default size. That's the size of the font that I originally designed the windows in. Then it gets the window text font from system.ini. If it's blank, then if it's not blank, then I rescale the window. I have a routine that just parses the point size out of the font name. And then I call my resize to font function, which is essentially the same as my scale windows function. You know what? I'm going to use med because that way I can use my function selection. Okay. Resize to font. And this just takes the scaling factor. If the scaling factor is 1, that means there's no change. Don't need to do anything. Just return. And then I just go through the list of controls on the window and call this rescale object function. The optional third parameter, again, is a 1 or a 0. If it's a 0, it means I don't want to reposition it. I just resize it. The default is to reposition and resize, so it just calls that on all of these. I made a note here if you want any additional post-processing, like if you need to do some kind of refreshing, you want to do that too, you can do it there. And then this function here is what rescales each individual object. So basically just get the current left, top, width, and height, and truncate it to the nearest, multiply it by the new factor, and then truncate it to the nearest whole number, and then move it if we have the move parameter set to 1, otherwise just reposition it. And it works pretty much the same as the C program. And it's easy enough to just copy and paste this to, it's just a couple of functions and some sort of logic to call them. It's easy enough to copy and paste to any Rex program. Most of my Rex programs do this. ANPM does it, but ANPM uses a user customizable font. I did get a kind of, I won't say complaint, I got a question about this from Martin, who pointed out, well, ANPM isn't using the window font, the default window font, why not? The answer is, well, the first time you run it, it would, but you can configure in ANPM the actual window font, and it will use whatever you have set. So in this case, it'll resize all of the controls to whatever you have set, but the logic is the same. The only difference is at the startup, instead of reading from os2.ini, it reads from anpm.ini to get the font that you have there. And so you can see there is a font settings. You can set the window font, the container font, and the text font, and they will all kind of, yeah, no internet access again. That's,
I was going to warn you.
yeah. Yeah.
It is more fun.
Yeah. Oh well. Anyway, it doesn't matter. I'll just minimize you. So that's C. That's VxRex. If anybody's interested, I can quickly kind of show you the logic in Sybil. I did say I could talk for 90 minutes if you want me to.
There's a lunch break also.
Yeah. All right. This will only take a minute. I'm not going to like fire up Sybil or anything. I'll just show you. ACL.
Like much longer, you'll be fired.
From what?
In jail, if he goes over like a ulcer.
Okay, so this is the Sybil code. It's Object Pascal, if anybody's familiar with that. I'm not actually that great at it. I basically just kind of wedged in some of this logic to Aaron's quite nice code here. I don't know if any of you are actually aware of this. NewView and AE, or at least AE after I did some work on it, there's an environment variable that it'll take the font from. The default font from, I believe. No, sorry. Yeah, NewView will, like the window font, not the editor font in AE. That's user configurable. But in NewView, and I believe I put this in AE for the dialog font. Yeah. Okay.
Is that a setting or a parameter?
It's an environment variable. I'll just see if I can find it somewhere. I think it might be in. No, it isn't. You know what? Main dot on window init, I believe, or window on window functions. I don't know. Anyway, it's there. I can see your room just kind of. But yeah, it's similar logic anyway. So I've got my resize font function in here somewhere. Here, main on. Create. Yeah, okay, that's right. There's a function in Aaron's components library called get nice default font, and that's what it is. It's in his component library, which is why I wasn't finding it there. And then it's I was looking at this yesterday. I swear I don't even remember what function it's in. So anyway, if you want to, in the off chance that any of you actually write stuff in Sybil, you can look at the AE or NewView sources. The logic's in there. It's not, in spite of my sort of being unable to find it here, it is actually not that easy. It's not that hard to find if you look at the code and you understand Sybil. So it's the same principle anyway. You just get the scaling factor, you go through all the controls you want to resize, and you multiply them by the scaling factor, position, and or dimensions. So I think I've probably bored all of the non-technical people enough here. Do I have any more questions on this, either on the implementation, on the coding, or on the feature in general?
It's nice.
Thank you.
Just get started, please. Thank you. I'm not going to reintroduce myself. It's getting old. I'm getting old. All right. I've actually been trying to figure out when I joined Voice as president, but that might actually now be 25 years ago, but I lost track when I submitted my resume somewhere on the Voice website. I think maybe it was 1997. I don't know. It's too long ago, but
You're not going to get a medal. Sorry.
no, I know. So what has been done has been kind of a quiet year. I've been doing a lot of other stuff, looking into the browser development, and this presentation will primarily touch on the infamous topic of rpm-os2voice.org. The gist of it, how can software be easily installed on OS2? If you just look on OS2 World, somebody wants to have the current Qt browser, you need to get a zip file here, you need to run a yum package, then it turns out that you need to use a begin lib path. It is not user-friendly, period. So we've had another Warpstock. There's somebody sitting in the room here next to that, behind the table, hiding behind the webcam. A little applause for him. He does the website in the background. He does the video montages every year, which is painstaking because sometimes every year, despite trying to do it correctly, something magically screws up beyond repair. The audio has to be resampled or re-recorded, despite having technical experience beyond no end. As you've seen, we've expanded our kit a bit this year. We've got wireless mics now, etc. So, where will there be a Warpstock next year? I'm also looking for volunteers to find a venue. Sandra last year did it in Germany, just over the border. I'm looking for volunteers. Otherwise, I might actually just be lazy and re-rent this location because so far I've heard no complaints. So Germany, Netherlands, it's all good for me, as long as it's a bit close to home. Looking at the browser development, the first 500 euros are in the bank, but we need more. Some tools are already around, like GCC 15. A thank goes out to Paul, while he has been trying single-handedly to maintain all of this stuff, which is not easy. Based on this whole browser discussion, there was some people suggesting like, well, can you not keep Qt 5 updated? It's very simple. We need to make choices, period. Very simple. To the point, sacrifice new name. We did with Qt 5, it works. Later I'll show you a Qt 5 based email client, a Russian package called Trojita, an open source mail client. We now have that on OS2. We have different Qt products that can now be ported to OS2, and we have a semi-usable browser. How many people here are using the dual browser? You? I thought you were running it as well.
Sometimes.
Okay, who's running it sometimes? Ah, okay. Your mileage may vary. One thing that we need is Qt 6 RPM. I hear somebody screaming behind the table there. We did an attempt trying to build one, but trust me, there's one person in the room here which I can hand the mic. Where's Greg? He's hiding now. Yeah. Greg, why don't you share with us your experience with Spec, the executive summary?
They suck.
If I may chime in a little bit, spec files are not really hard, but they are tedious because you often have to repeat the same cycle again, and especially if it starts to a rebuild, then it's tedious. But there are workarounds for that. But it's doable definitely. But you need to, and let me say, there are plenty of examples on the internet of how to make an RPM and do everything together. So you can just take an existing one and adjust it for OS2. But yeah, sucks is I think a bit harsh.
When you're trying to do OS2 specific stuff, like shell or config.sys manipulation, you have to then kind of be going to the references that are available on that, and then trying to merge that into existing spec files, and there's stuff that is in the same place, and it can get, yeah, I do use them from time to time, but I understand where Greg's analysis is coming from.
Over the last couple of years, you've heard me talk about the GCC factory project. And every time it just didn't come to any form of success. And the biggest reason was the damn spec files. Everybody that I talk to, people either can work with them to some degree, or other people just run out screaming to the fire exits and don't want to touch them. So what did we come up with? The reason for packaging software is that people like Paul Smedley say, I get no feedback. But yeah, just start looking what type of dependencies you need to do. You need to get a zip file here. You need to. So there's now a zip file for Qt6. Now the reason that Paul isn't doing it because he doesn't like spec files, he told me yet again. I'm not going to hold it against him because we've got a current Qt6. So when Dimitri gets back into the game, let's help to keep up. They're also going to work together to get it done. But, and I think I just missed the others. The whole thing with packages is, Steve Ballmer was once standing in the stage in the 90s somewhere, almost looking silly. He was standing there, developers. I think the guy almost got a heart attack. You should have seen the sweat was dropping off his forehead. I can just scream off the rooftop, packages. I want it. But why? Well, what do we need? We need to have packages that provide a useful contribution. I don't need to have the half of Hobbes repackaged in Warp in packages. What I need is I want to have software that's functional. So there we come again to the blasted RPM file. So Alex wrote a little toolkit, a little sample, how you can do dependency checking from Warp-in. Why Warp-in? Warp-in is much easier to do. It's still a bit cryptic, but compared to a spec file, a lot of people in the room, if they see a sample Warp-in package with some command line wizardry, can push this together. So we can do dependency checking. Thank you, Alex. You'll see some of those first packages come alive in this demo. So as of last night, we finally got it running. There was already an RPM os2voice.org that is now public, and you can add these repositories to the Arkanoa package manager. One is an RPM repository, the other one is a Warp-in repository. And the trick is, the Warp-in packages are simple to build. And if you add the dependency checking for all of these DLLs, then we can make developing packages that install a program on an OS2 desktop with an icon much easier. Only ArcOS 5.1 is going to be supported. It's very simple. I need to cut the crap. I'm not going to go anywhere else. There's one me. There's a very few. We've got about 15 developers that port, that can package. Again, we need to make choices. I'm also at this point, I'm not going to accept requests like, can you package this? Can you package that? First, we're going to do what we think is sensible. And I'll show you some of that in the next steps. The packages will first be put into an experimental directory. They will live there for 3 months, and people should then test them. After that period, they will be moved from experimental to release. Very simple. If the house then burns down, don't complain. This is a policy to help push people to get engaged. Not everybody's complaining, but there are sometimes people saying on the forum, well, it's not tested. Well, here is your opportunity to test. I can't do it alone. It's that simple. Look, it's very simple. It's free of charge, doesn't cost you any penny. We're putting it in our spare time. So if you want to help us. Alex created the dependency checking. I've got other people who build packages. Jan-Erik Larka from Sweden has built a tame package, and I'll get in detail to what that is. I think it's the next slide, actually. So,
Roderick,
yes,
what do you package?
what do you mean?
I mean, what software are you putting in the packages?
I'll get to that right now. This is a good example. One of the things that is new in Arca OS is there are the CWMM classes in there from Chris Wolgemuth. These are an enhancement, but due to software patents, Arcanoa cannot distribute a modern media player because that's a guaranteed way to either pay a whole bunch of royalties or to end up in an endless potential pile of lawsuits. Audio and video codecs are covered by a gazillion licenses and patent fees, which make it most. I looked at it in my Menzies days, and a license from Intel for Indio at the time costed $500,000, just to pick a number from the shelf. QuickTime, I think, was also $100,000. MP3 was also $100,000. So the numbers add up rapidly. The package that Greg has been working on is a single warp-in package that has MPlayer with a UI for it in SMPlayer. It has timidity with the patch files in it so that you can play MIDI files. And it installs an updated MP3 codec for OGG and for FLAC. All of this stuff is put into a single warp-in package. Now you don't need to go to Hops to get SMPlayer. Now you don't need to get MPlayer. All of this stuff is put into a single package. It will be available on the RPM-OS2 voice repository. Then you can click on it, it will download it, and it will install everything. And here's the key reason why we need to have it in a repository. If there is an update for SMPlayer that fixes some bugs, or for example adds new video formats, then we can put it there. You install the package manager, when you run the next time update old, will say, hey, I have a new package, would you like to get it? That whole mechanism is now missing. You need to start scrolling through websites and newsletters and netlabs on 10 different pages to figure out, is this updated?
So it's just RPM running warp-in?
There are two. Arcanoa Package Manager basically supports two types of software distribution packages. One is the RPM format, and the other one is that you can also have a repository for warp-in packages. The missing link that was there, because a lot of software that gets ported with GCC has a dependency on libc, SDL, all of these DLLs. If you just look at the current web browser, Double, it's not manageable with zip files. There are too many moving parts. And that's why with a lot of these ports, it's a mess. One of the things that I've always liked is to use this scanner on OS2. So there are multiple parts to getting this little thing to work. Now, do I want to have a command line tool? Yeah. Would I like to have a graphical program where I can just click on the mouse button like on Windows and Linux and scan it? Yeah, that sounds more like it. That's the experience I want. So years ago, there was a project that's now on NetLabs that's called Tame. And Tame is just nothing else than a PM shell front end to the sane Linux libraries. The old warp-in package has the sane libraries stuffed in there. So where do you get the updates? So what we now have is there's a new package in there called Tame. All of the dependencies that are in rpmnetlabs.org are there. And the warp-in package, with one click of a mouse after you downloaded it, automatically drags it in. The benefit is, once sane is updated in rpmnetlabs.org, it will automatically fetch it to your system when you run an update. In the past, the sane version that drives your scanner, the Linux port, was statically in the warp-in package, and there was no connection to the outside world that you could know sane is updated. And this is true for a lot of these Linux ports, is that if there's an update available, You need to figure out, is it updated, yes or no? Where is it available? Where do I get it? Oh, it needs another updated DLL. This is why we need to decouple as far as possible from zip files and move to something of a package file that is then in a repository that the package manager can say, hey, there's a new updated package for your software. Do you want to update it? I'll show you how this works. We're, by the way, working on another package. One of my favorite DOS games is Transport Tycoon, which is with trains and public transport and railway lines. So we're working on that. That thing requires SDL, a specific version. Where do I get it? You need to get another tool for it. So you see, with all of these packages, you quickly end up in a forest of files, zip files, that all need to be downloaded. Where's the latest version for Transport Tycoon? Well, it's on a URL that you can find somewhere in the OS2 World Forum. Now break down that whole facade of searching, and then you get to that I already described. This is the MMOS2 stuff. We now have a new IMAP client for OS2, which was supported by Greg. Thank you, Greg. Is it perfect? No. But if you want to, we have an alternative next to Thunderbird, and it's an RPM. Why? This thing has a gazillion libraries. It's dependent on Qt5. So if you select the Trojita client from the repository, it will check your system. Do I have the right version of Qt5 installed? It will download all of that stuff for you. See, everywhere there are two things: updates and the dependencies. Those two things make a headache for the user. Where do I get it? How do I install it? And then we had people at Warpstock over the years that would have just copied multiple versions of DLLs in the lib path. We had one user that had Firefox and Thunderbird in the lib path and had copied different versions of libc everywhere. Untangling. So the package manager is not perfect. I agree with that. Some people don't like the directory structure. But what do you prefer? A package manager with a directory structure forced upon you to a degree that gives you functional software, or something where you have to pull your hair out till midnight until you finally find out how it works? There's also now RPMs for RDP, for free RDP. There's a note for you, Alex. As it turns out, your executable for the Arkanoa remote tool, it looks for free RDP.
It looks for a file name that's defined in the INI or the environment.
Oh, okay, then we need to look at that. Then I need to look if the RPM can fix that. If you go to DG's website, for example, and you see how many releases there have been of the free RDP port with continuous enhancements, this is a perfect example why you want to have not a zip, but something of a file from a repository. I don't care if it's warp-in. I don't care if it's delivered in a smelly old sock. But what I want to have is that the user can get an update. Because DG has been, over the last 2 years, has been making a free RDP port for OS2. I think it even supports sound, does it not?
Yes.
Yes. So if you want to connect to a Windows machine and use free RDP to access the browser there, these are perfect examples why you need to get away from these stinking old zips. Again, if you manage it, and you can spend all of your time on that, but that is not the 2025 experience the user's looking for. They're looking for click, install. I'll also show you how it works. What do I have more? For the last week, we've been pulling our hair out trying to convert the Qt 6.2 into RPMs. Don't go there, okay? So we'll get there. We're working with the people in the engine room to get it done, because this is where the metal meets the track. This is what needs to happen. Paul Smedley says, I don't get a lot of feedback. Now, there are some brave souls that download the current Qt and the Double browser. But if you have the wrong DLL version installed, or you make a misstep, you get extra crashes, because you need to have the correct software. the Double installation that we currently have for the old outdated Double browser, apart from the crashes, we saw 0 support calls. People say, what DLL is installed? That was the first browser in OS2 history that was delivered, as far as I know, as a RPM package. It deals with all the updates and gets it in. Again, is this a perfect system? No. But if you look at how many DLLs the browser is dependent on, anywhere from 40 to 60. Just take libc, the whole Qt stuff. And if there's an update, where is it? How do I get it? So for Paul Smedley, his testing of Qt, we need to switch away from these zip files and move to something. If this could be done in an RPM, I don't care, as long as it's a system and Paul can say you can go here, you can click on the button. The reason that Bitwise Works switched to RPM files and made it mandatory for people to use it, because Sylvan told me on several occasions we were wasting 75% of our time on mismatched DLLs or misplaced DLLs. That's why we need this. So after all of this, let's move to the daily life of how this works. Let's see, I've got a not optimal experience. Where is my, can I do Alt F4? Okay, let's see if we can get this to work. I'm hanging on a dongle that's connected to my mobile phone, but I should have gotten an IP address. So the first thing I'm going to do is, it's still, I should have an IP address. Is it connected? Yes. Ah, here we go. So here is the new RPM repository, the Warpin repository available.
So, increase your font size there.
Where's that again?
View font container.
A lot of points.
That's a little. I think 14 is probably fine.
Okay, so this is new. We just got this working last night. So when you now upload a file, I can approve it. I put it in the directory, and a couple of minutes later, a script that runs on an OS2 VM indexes it, and it creates this. So Rich Walsh has created this. This is what I call a nice experience. Embellish is hidden on Hobus. It's tucked away somewhere in the directory, 5 directory levels deep. You need to find it. But, huh? Yeah, but now you can just go here, click on install, warp on, okay, we click on OK. Now this might take slightly longer because it's on a Wi-Fi connection. Is it downloading it or?
I don't see anything happening here.
Take a look at the cast list.
Did it just freeze it? I did actually delete it late. Oh, I think it hung itself somehow.
Demo effect.
You're not using the latest version, is it?
Seriously?
You didn't install it with RPM.
This is true, but it should work, Warpin, right? Or did you make some fixes to it?
I think it's probably trying to spawn wget and not succeeding.
Well, let me, can I kill it here?
Yeah, it's working, isn't it?
There should be a wget on this system. I mean, it's a standard RPM install.
Yeah, I'll take a look at the log and see what it says. The ANPM log, I mean, not the RPM.
Where is that?
I did notice.
It's under var log, I believe, or wherever you have that set.
This is a standard install.
Var log, look for ANPM dot either DEB or log, probably ANPM dot DEB.
Yeah, and,
This one?
Just, okay, logs, yeah, that one. So go down, actually, I think this one is just gonna be showing you the RPM stuff. You might, yeah, that's just RPM. You don't have a deb file there, all right. That's gonna be in the probably ANPM program directory.
Ah. It's drive L. Oh no, ANPM you said, sorry.
Yeah, sys apps. Unless you install it somewhere else.
No, it's all standard.
Okay, yeah, you don't have it, okay. I guess you're not, oh, it uses its own, yeah, that's right, so.
I'll just try again.
I don't know why. If it happens again, you might need to rerun it, you might need to run it in debug mode. But.
Some of the data.
Yeah.
That's thing.
Yeah, there we go.
Oh, there we go.
Please wait.
Okay, this should be your script in action.
Yeah.
Because what now happens is that the warp-in package only has the old OS2 program. And all of the other stuff has been thrown out. And the warp-in script goes like, hey, you need scan image, you don't have it. That is looks a bit clunky, but I think it's already an improvement. All of that searching you had to do, I now just click on the yes button. It says that the required plus stack library is needed. So do you want me to get it? Yes. You need libusb? Yes. So I do next. I install tame. And then it should, there we go. Now it does yum get in the background. I hope it's going to work over my slow internet line. Yes. No, it has a connection.
But not so far. If you put your IP widget on, you can see what's happening.
What happens if you disabled rpmnetlabs.org? No, because it did. Oh, did it just blow it up?
Yeah, you can, no, but it won't be able to access the working database because you've already got working open.
Did I? NetLabs repository, it is enabled.
Okay.
So why is this thing not doing anything?
I don't know, check the task list, see if it's running RTM, yum. Check top or something.
Is it detached?
Doesn't matter, it still show up in top. It's called installing the
ANPM, sock tidy. I don't think it's running RxQ.
If you had a T in it, that we could see what's going on the screen, and at the same time ANPM could get read the log.
Anyway.
So this is then the embellish editor. Click, I agree, click, yes, make config sys changes, install, yes. And here we have an embellish installation. That's how it's supposed to be. Now, maybe Jan-Erik Larka blew up the tame package with the latest update. I don't know. I can retry later when it's on a network cable. But at home, I could just run the install. It got the packages. I selected my Canon scanner from there, pressed the scan button, and effectively after downloading and clicking next in 1.5 minutes, my scanner worked. So now one of the things that's also interesting is that we have this WPI file that Greg has been working on. So this is what I was explaining to you, is that why wouldn't you want to package this? So we have SM player and we have M player. These are Linux ports. They're continuously being updated with bug fixes and supporting new video formats. So this package will hopefully, after Warpstock, be added to the repository. And then when you download it, it does this. Now, warning, this package says, Greg, where are you? Oh, this hasn't run yet, right?
It's never been
No.
run.
So,
No time like a demo.
Error two, yeah.
Well, I didn't know that it would be demo today.
now your head's on the chop block.
Yeah, we'll see what happens.
So we click yes.
Tomorrow morning.
There we go. See, so this does all of the separate stuff. Timid. Oh no. Yeah. Oh, there's a CRC error. Okay. Okay. Demo effect.
Oh, yeah, that always works.
No, it's not gonna work. Sorry.
We'll patch in the demo later.
Yeah, I think your problem's your computer there.
Oh, my computer gets the blame. Oh, okay.
Generally
Well, let's
think of-
see, wget hung, and then yum hung, and then warping found a graph file. I don't know, what's the common factor here?
The operator.
That's the other option.
I've worked at a company where we made printers, and every time one of the software developers compared me to one of the guys that worked in a physics laboratory. I think it was in Austria, and at a certain moment, the people that worked there said that he wasn't allowed to walk in because every time that he walked in, experiments would mysteriously fail in the most. You know that story, I guess. Yeah, something like that. I'll just try it one more time for the fun of it. See if where's the tame package.
Warp in.
Would the machine didn't stop walking in the view anytime?
Uninstall. See, and for people who are interested, yes, you can uninstall it as well. There we go. Now let's try this one more time. Oh, it's still busy. Tame. Let's see if we get lucky this time. Yes, yes. Next, next. Install. Yes. There's something broken in this yum-get package.
Try running yum manually and see what happens.
Sorry?
Run get manually and see what happens. Because that's basically all the script is doing, as I recall.
And it?
I just ran, yeah.
Of course, everything is screwed up.
I don't know that it worked in the sense that it installed, but it ran to completion.
So, delete everything.
You need to actually specify some packages. But you know, just run yum itself. Like yum install whatever scan image or whatever it is.
Well, the thing it needs, what it actually does in the background is this.
Okay.
So when you run yum install sane, it starts
Okay.
setting up no package. Yeah. Is it actually already in?
Are you sure you have the repo configured?
Yes.
And enabled?
Let's see. It's scan image. Is it already installed? Now, one thing I did do on this laptop,
Scan IMP.
I think it's not installed. Oh, it is. Okay. Maybe it survived. I threw it out to have it reinstalled. Sorry. Okay. Well, we'll just try it then. Tame.
Didn't find the scanner.
No, it did find it. So if I now do a preview. It's 0 bytes. No, I'll keep it at this. So you installed it and it worked. Oh, where's Greg? Oh. I hate that. So it works on his system. At least it worked. That's the good thing.
Like you said, I don't know if it worked in the sense that the stuff was all installed correctly.
Or does it mean you can install it only once?
No, I can't stand it. Can you get your laptop?
Hey, let's another time.
Yeah, okay, yes.
Otherwise we won't have dinner.
Yes, relax,
I'll
relax.
just demonstrate it tomorrow.
Yeah, we'll demonstrate it tomorrow. So one of the other things that I do like to highlight, if you try it and we depend on your feedback, it has never been released. That Trojita port was never released, right? That's the first time that we made it public. So if you want to have an alternative, it's a bit clunky. We have a Trojita port available. It's on rpmos2voice.org, so you need to add the repo. So I can just go here, Trojita, install. It's 12 megabytes, so it downloads it. And that's one of the other things that the package should do. It shouldn't just install it, it should also make a folder on your desktop so that you know where to find it. Yeah, I interrupted it. I just remember Bjorn told me that the scanner wasn't working on his, that the mobile phone wasn't charging. I think the... Oh, there we go. Yeah, the USB port was broken on that thing. Hear it?
Yeah.
No, it's still processing the data. Wait, and then... There we go, it's scanned. So this is a quick example. It's very simple. We need people, we need volunteers. It's not going to be done by itself. Jan Erik spent half a day taking the Warpin package apart and then reassembling it and getting the commands in there and getting it figured out. German did it work, so we fixed that. There was some stupid thing in the Warpin script. So here you can see how software development is coming in. That thing that I showed you with the multimedia, once that Warpin package is live, you should be able to just download any type of multimedia file and play it on OS2. MPEG-4, AVI, QuickTime, etc. Music files. Bringing some more life finally back into OS2 instead of some stupid return control code you have to boot back into Windows. And once it's updated, you'll get an update. So I hope this provides, although a clunky insight, in what it can be on OS2. So thank you for your time. We're going to now arrange for dinner. There is a list there at the desk. And we'll, I want to thank, are there any questions there in the YouTube chat or not? Okay. So I hope everybody's having a good time. We thank for the people online. We're going to have dinner now. Where's the next presentation? Okay.
Yeah.